Today, Patty and I are welcoming Rabbi Spero.
Diminution of the American personality. Americans afraid to speak what they believe. That's not American.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today, Patty and I are welcoming Rabbi Spero. How do you pronounce your first name?
Aryeh.
Aryeh. Rabbi Aryeh Spero. Welcome.
Very good to be here, Jeanne.
Now, he has a new book out called Pushback, Reclaiming the American Judeo-Christian Spirit. Why don't you tell us what your book is about?
Well, as the title says, it's important for us in this moment of history to push back against those, and there are many, who are trying to rob this country of their heritage. There's no question that this country was founded on a particular ethos. It's called the Judeo-Christian ethos. And every country, every nation needs an identity to survive. And we've been successful because of the wonderful components of this Judeo-Christian ethos, personal responsibility, things of that nature. And it's under assault, especially by people on the left who have a socialist vision for the country, or they're transnationalists. And so pushback asks the American people to push back against those forces. You know, for the last 50 years, 60 years, the country's been able to coast, and we haven't had to really fight back. But I think it's obvious to everyone now that what we believe in, the Judeo-Christian ethos, is a moral philosophy, is a way of life, is under assault, a deliberate assault. And if we don't push back, it will be taken from us, but worse, it will be taken from our children. And I think as parents, as citizens, we have an obligation to pass on this blessed heritage to our posterity. So it's time for the American people to push back. It's a momentous time in history. It's a blessing to push back. First of all, it makes us stronger.
Yes.
When you go through life and you simply coast, you never become, nor do you discover what you really are. And being part of a great battle makes you stronger. And then we also owe it to the philosophy and to our ancestors who worked, sacrificed, and died in behalf of this heritage. So push back, reclaim our American Judeo-Christian spirit.
I was curious, when you said there are many factors that are trying to rob us, can you tell us a little bit of what you were referring to there?
There are people who have a very left-wing, transnational view of the world. They want us to be just, for example, just another Sweden.
Yes.
Or we should capitulate to the guidelines of The Hague or the International Court. And they're just not comfortable with distinct Americanism. They consider themselves citizens of the globe, citizens of the world, and they've been embarrassed about being distinctly American. They travel in circles that are more universalist. But when you're embarrassed about being distinctly American, you do one of two things. You either try to change America to be some type of shapeless, universal entity. That's one thing that you do. Or what you try to do is to deny your Americanism. And this is quite obvious. It's happening from people on the left. It's happening to many people that are secular. And they're embarrassed by the Judeo-Christian ethos because it happens to be a religious ethos. And I'm not talking about issues such as abortion, although I generally do not favor abortion. But we have a particular moral philosophy. We see good and evil, right and wrong, differently than other cultures.
Yes.
And America has been successful because of this moral outlook that's unique to the Judeo-Christian ethos. As I tell people all the time, we've been successful not simply because we happen to be a continent between the Atlantic and Pacific. We're successful because of our big idea, and the big idea is the Judeo-Christian ethos. It's the ethos of personal responsibility.
Yes.
It's the ethos of saying that there are certain truths And I think that a lot of universalism is guided by moral relativism. What is morality in the mind of the left or those people that don't believe in our distinct way, our philosophy? It's to say, well, everything just depends upon the circumstance. And when you do that, usually the mob rules, or the most powerful, or the most moneyed group rules. So it's important to have a vision of what's right and wrong. After all, it's that vision that had us fight communism, that had us fight Nazism, that has us right now fighting terrorism. And it must continue for our safety, for our prosperity, personal responsibility. Right now we're living in a time in the last few years when people feel that, well, really we should be dependent upon the government. That's contrary to what made this country great. And it's not only a philosophy that's good for the country, it's good for the individual. When you tell an individual early on in life that you're talented, you have promise, you have creativity within you, but you on your own must marshal these forces within you, well, you grow. Taking risk also provides growth. When you tell a person, don't worry, just rely on the government, rely on some ruling class, the person never grows. And part of the book, because it does deal with certain religious aspects, is that God wants us to grow. He wants us to be strong. God didn't put us here simply to be victims, to be dependent. He created us in His image. God is not dependent. God is not a victim. And we have too much victimology in the country. It's as if whoever can claim victimhood, well, they're going to be rewarded by the largesse of government. You don't want a society where people think that the best way to get ahead is by finding some way to say, I'm a victim, I'm entitled, I should be receiving the largesse. People don't grow that way. And God wants us to be strong. And He wants us to grow that way. And what's good for the individual is good for the country.
That's right.
You know, when you said earlier that, it was, well, the whole title of the book is Time for Us to Push Back. There are so many of these subtle changes, these subtle forces that are coming against our values and our culture. I mean, even the Supreme Court, has handed decisions that said we should, I forgot exactly the language, but that we should pay attention to what the global outlook, the global perspective should become part of the way we even though it's against our Constitution, we need to have that. You mentioned the uniquely American outlook, and I think it's even that uniquely American way of doing things. I mean, we're preserving freedom around the world. It's very important that we preserve that and keep that, not only for our own culture, but for keeping freedom alive in other places.
I'm glad you brought that up because it is in the book. Justice Ginsburg, Justice Breyer, they've talked of looking to other cultures and other legal systems, some even in Africa, The Hague, of course, the International Court, looked to their guidelines or how they view situations to be the basis of certain decisions. And that's disastrous.
Well, they're supposed to be upholding the Constitution.
Isn't that something? That's exactly what I said. They've been appointed to uphold the Constitution. We didn't appoint Ginsburg or Breyer or whoever to come in and to social engineer society based on their own personal outlook. For that, they can go be a professor somewhere in a college or start their own little think tank. They were asked to uphold the Constitution. The Constitution is the only guarantee that we have for our liberties. It's a unique Constitution. No country has the amendments that we have of freedom of religion and the right to bear arms and all of the amendments, and just in general the inspirational foundation of the whole Constitution. So I think it's very dangerous when justices say that we're not going to live by the Constitution as written, but we're going to bring in other cultural guidelines. First of all, that's going to change the culture. And I like our culture.
It's already changing the culture.
Absolutely. And it's going to damage, really threaten our freedoms because other countries don't have the perception of freedom that we do, and liberty, or the right to bear arms, the right to protest, the right of assembly, and the freedom of religion.
Right.
And we see that is under assault by this administration, but it would be by, I think, any left-wing outlook. So that's a very important point.
I wonder, as we push back, I think all of us would like to protect our culture the way it is now, the way we understand Judeo-Christian ethics and everything here in our own country. But sometimes it's very hard to determine where that is being attacked. Like, you know, even there's a lot of commercials on TV or phrases that you hear people say, and I'm beginning to hear those things in a different way. I'm beginning to realize there is an attack here. And as much as I would like to speak up, sometimes I'm not sure exactly how to push back or how to do that. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I do, especially in the last chapter. Pushback means we have to really be active. You have to speak out, and don't be afraid of the name-calling. Matter of fact, that is the strategy of those who are trying to change our culture. Their strategy is to intimidate us.
Yes.
You're a racist.
And to divide us.
Divide us.
Yeah.
To say that, well, if you have this opinion, if you uphold the Judeo-Christian culture, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, Islamophobe, misogynist, whatever it is, it works for them because no one wants to be called a racist or an Islamophobe or misogynist. I'll give you an example. There are some areas in the country where Islamic communities are pushing for Sharia law.
Yes.
And Sharia law is Islamic law instead of the Constitution. Well, we can't have that here. What unites us as a people, as a country, is our Constitution. And if you have a country where it's two sets of law, then you have what's called balkanization. You basically have a divided country. So those of us who have said, no, you cannot have Sharia law. We have a Constitution. What anybody does in their home or in their place of worship is their business, but we all have to live by a same common law. That's what keeps us together. That's the glue. So they say, oh, well, you're Islamophobic. And then you're supposed to, of course, be intimidated and say, okay, have Sharia law. No. You can't allow that to stop you from speaking up. It's a strategy that they use. It's been very effective. If you say, for example, that you want to define marriage the way it has been defined since Adam and Eve, you're Islamophobic. No, we're not. We're not asking that people that are homosexual be denied jobs or not be able to rent or not be able to vote. We're not Islamophobic, but marriage has a definition. So they intimidate people that way. Pushback says, don't be afraid of that intimidation. What we have to do is far more important than someone calling us a name. You know, when I was a kid, we had an expression back in Ohio and Cleveland, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I look at America now, and I see people who are afraid of being called a name to such an extent that they will not stand up for their own values, for their own existence, because somebody will call them a name. So number one, don't be afraid of being called a name. Secondly, we're going to have to go out into the streets. We're going to have to be protesting in the streets. We're going to have to raise our voices. In this country, no movement has come about without people actually being in the streets, demonstrating to the public, demonstrating to our representatives that we're serious, and we can't coast. It takes courage. Listen, people get butterflies in their stomach when they have to speak out, especially in an audience when everyone is against them, or they have to go into the street. But hey, it's your heritage. It's worth it. It's for your children. It's for the country. And I do say something when I'm speaking in these type of venues. You can't have America unless you first have Americans. And part of being an American is being a rugged individual, confident, a person who expresses what he believes. And what I see in this era that we're in is a diminution of the American personality. Americans afraid to speak what they believe. That's not American. You cannot have America if you have Americans that have become so sissified and so intimidated that they don't speak. They're not individuals, that they're afraid. My great-grandfather, my grandfathers were not afraid to speak their mind.
Okay, another thing that was, I think, really important that our founders talked about was that our Constitution was designed for a moral and religious people.
Very good. John Adams was stressed that. He said, we have a Constitution. How do you keep the people to be moral, orderly, You don't want to have a police state. So he said, if you have a moral people, they will self-police themselves. They will know where the constraints, where the limits are. Where is that self-policing? Where is that moral horizon? It's in the Judeo-Christian ethos.
That's right.
And I'm not talking about being a holy roller. I'm not a holy roller. I'm talking, though, about a philosophy that believes in a certain amount of temperance and thrift and a certain amount of propriety. And if you are a person who is raised and believes in that Judeo-Christian ethos, it's a moralizing structure to your life. And that's what's so wonderful about the Judeo-Christian ethos, which is unique. There's nothing like it in the world. It's more than just a religion. It's more than just a philosophy, more than just a morality. It's a civilization. The Judeo-Christian ethos constitutes our civilization, which, in my opinion, surpasses the Greek, the Roman, even the civilization during the time of King David and Solomon. And we have this. And not to fight for it is cowardly, and it demonstrates a lack of appreciation for what we have been bequeathed. Getting something as a gift means you have to guard it, you have to pass it on, and you have to fight
freedom
for
is
it.
not free.
Very good. Again, it's in the book. I cite a line from Goethe in Germany. He wrote a book, it was in the, I guess, late 1700s, which he says, if you want freedom, you cannot take it for granted. You have to fight for it every day.
I really appreciate you helping us understand how important it is to speak out. I have read several different things that talk about how, you know, when a new idea is first introduced, sometimes it's shocking, like the whole idea of gay marriage.
Okay.
You know, we would never have had this conversation 50 years ago. We would never have been. But the first time a group of people hears that, they are so shocked. And even if the outrage comes, but the second time it's brought up, there's less outrage.
Right.
The third time, there's even less.
It's a
And
conditioning
so it wears
process.
us down. Yes. So
Did,
it's
did you
so
read the book?
important.
Because in there, I have a quote from John Dewey. John Dewey says, you know, he's a famous American philosopher.
Yes.
He had a lot of ideas regarding education. He says it takes about 50 years for an idea, once it's birthed, and maybe initially it's considered radical, to eventually it becomes mainstream.
Yes.
And this is what happens. Now, today it even takes less because the internet,
Media.
the communication, and things that first appeared radical eventually become mainstream. Now, certain things should become mainstream. Slavery was a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But I think that we can trust ourselves. We know the difference between slavery being something wrong and where the time has come to abolish slavery, as opposed to a value of what marriage is. We know the difference, and we can't allow accusations, well, we're homophobic, Islamophobic, racist, mean-spirited. This idea of mean-spirited, that means what? In the name of mean-spirited, we're not supposed to have standards? Or they talk about tolerance. I believe in tolerance. I'm Jewish. I rely on people's tolerance towards the Jewish people. But tolerance doesn't mean that you abandon standards.
Yes.
We are only as good as our judgment and as our standards are. And I think that when you look at people from the left, very liberal people, they have no problem asserting what they believe.
Yes.
It's all throughout the media, it's all throughout government. And you ask yourself, why do they assert and we don't? Well, the answer must be they believe in the morality of their cause. Well, we have to believe in the morality of our cause too. And I think what has happened here in America and in the West is that we've allowed the people on the left to define, well, what is tolerance and what is compassion, what is love.
Yeah, you have to define your terms.
We have definitions that are wonderful, they're classical, they've been proven by history, the founders supported them, the Bible supports them, and we have to believe that we have the moral high ground. And when a person believes that they are being thrust by a moral high ground, they have confidence. And that's what I want from this book, to give the American people the confidence to speak what they know is right.
Well, we are out of time. Could you please tell our listeners where they can find you online?
Very good.
What about the book?
The book is called Pushback. Now, I have a particular website. It's called Caucus for America. So it's caucusforamerica.com. You can receive it through Amazon. Go to your bookstores, and soon it will be on the what is it called? Kindle, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Kindle, the ebooks. But go to Caucus for America, or also go to pushbackamerica.com, and let's do it together.
All right. Well, thank you for being our guest.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
For believers to live